What is up, everybody? Purple and Gold podcast for Monday, April 6th. LSU back in the D1 baseball top 25. They come into the poll at number 24. This is the only poll that they made an appearance in. Ole Miss also back in the poll. They are number 25. So it will be number 24 at number 25 this weekend in Oxford. LSU and Ole Miss replaced Kentucky and Florida in the D1 baseball top 25. A couple of things I wanted to touch on today. One is what I would do about Zach York and the first base situation, the catching situation going forward. So it was a tough weekend for Zach York. Two pretty critical errors opened the door for some big innings and really hurt LSU this weekend. In SEC play, I think he's down to like 140. No homers in SEC play, and he's committed 5 errors on the season. I think it's time you have to make a change there. So Eddie Yaman, after Omar Cerna was injured yesterday, really came in and had some good at-bats. He had a couple of extra base hits. He was hit by a pitch. And he's had some other good at-bats in the midweek when he's gotten in. And so I think it's time to give him a shot. Now, he could play some first base. We know he can catch. I don't think he did a bad job catching yesterday. So I think between first base, catcher, and DH, I would like to see those three guys, Cerna, Yaman, and Aaron Beatty. Now, tomorrow night, you may not see Cerna against Bethune-Cookman coming off that hit that he took. Aaron Beatty was the DH yesterday, so I would fully expect that you'll have Aaron Beatty behind the plate against Bethune-Cookman. Eddie Yaman could possibly play first base, which would open the door for Mason Braun to be a DH. I know LSU views Mason Braun as an outfielder with the potential to be a future first baseman. I don't know if against Bethune-Cookman they would give him a shot at first base. But I think in any event, that's the way that this needs to happen. I suppose there's one other way you could do this, and that would be Aaron Beatty could catch, Yaman could DH, John Pearson could play first base, and you could insert Trent Caraway back into the lineup. I think John Pearson's been a little more comfortable at third base than he was at first base, although he did end the game playing first base in extra innings yesterday. As far as Zach York goes, look, I know he's drawn the ire of a lot of LSU discussion on Twitter and message boards and stuff, and I don't want to bash Zach York. I don't know if Zach York can still get hot and have a role on this team down the stretch. We've seen guys do this before, but it really has been a struggle. And he seems like the quintessential, you never know how it's going to play up, right, when you come from the mid-majors to the SEC. He hasn't had a ton of trouble necessarily in non-conference games and midweek games. I'm not saying he was great, but he's had a couple of 2-homer games. He seems to be more comfortable in that environment against that type of pitching. I would give this a hard reset. I would sit him tomorrow, and I think I would attempt to sit him all 3 games at Ole Miss. You're going to see Hunter Elliott on Friday. You're probably going to see Cade Townsend, who's back again. I don't know if Ole Miss will bump him up to Saturday. You're going to see some tough pitching. I would give Eddie Yaman, Mason Braun, Omar Cerna, Aaron Beatty the bulk of that playing time. So let's get to something off the field related to LSU baseball, and it's about Jay Johnson and the NIL stuff and some things that happened last week and some reporting that came out today. So, for a quick recap, um, the way the rev share is divvied up at LSU, the 20.5 million, is that football gets 75%, men's basketball gets 15%. I'm sorry, football gets, that's right. Men's basketball gets 15%, women's basketball gets 10%, and every other sport gets 5%. There was a report today that may possibly change from football going from 75 to 70, men's basketball staying at 15, women's basketball going from 10 to 15, and baseball staying with all the other sports. Some of the things that were cited have been viewership of the women's basketball games. The Valentine's Day night game between LSU and South Carolina did north of 2 million viewers. That was slightly more viewership than LSU's Game 2 victory over Coastal Carolina last year in the national championship game in baseball. Attendance is in an uptick. Interest in women's basketball seems to be in an uptick. And with the bulk of LSU's team coming back, the thought is if Kim Mulkey can hire a couple of good assistants to replace Gary Reedus and Daphne Mitchell, which she hired one today, and they could get a couple of bigs and maybe a third depth piece in the transfer portal, the Lady Tigers could make a run and have a Final Four national championship type team. I saw one early top 25 today that had LSU up at number 4. And that's certainly, something that I think LSU wants to do. It's also sort of widely known here now. Look, Will Wade has his own boosters and Heath Troyer, and they're going to do their own fundraising. Kim Mulkey has a lot of her own boosters. She's going to have to do some of her own fundraising. Jay Johnson and LSU baseball do some of their own fundraising. Zach Greenwell in the athletic department, the coaches committee, those type of baseball-only things. There's been some speculation that LSU maybe lost out in the transfer portal on some guys. Landon Mack was one who pitched Friday night for Tennessee, and that maybe LSU was more in a bargain bin in the transfer portal this offseason, and maybe some of that is being blamed for, Trent Carraway, Braden Simpson, Zach York, a lot of those guys not delivering. Cooper Moore was fine before he got hurt. We know that Arkansas and Mississippi State, some of these other schools, we know they're putting more rev share into baseball than LSU is, but they also don't have the ability really to win a championship in football. So they don't have a $40 million football roster. So that's always going to be a situation, a school like Kentucky in basketball, Arkansas and Mississippi State in baseball, where they don't have the ability to win a championship in football, so they're not going to sink that money into the roster. Where this is sort of getting dicey right now, though, is in that same report today, and this is someone who's attributed to working for Newsweek, he tweeted this out on X, that maybe LSU's not prepared to go all out. That was the phrase, to keep Jay Johnson should an MLB team come and get him. I don't think Jay Johnson in his immediate future necessarily has a want to coach in MLB. What I think you have to worry about is, would there be a team out there who would be willing to either fire their coach in college or force their coach to retire and throw an inordinate amount of money at Jay Johnson? So let me just go off the top of my head. We've seen Texas Tech throw NIL money around in football. We've seen Texas Tech with Pat Mahomes throw some NIL money around in softball. Would Texas Tech force Tim Tadlock out? And would they attempt to pay Jay Johnson a ridiculous amount of money? I don't know. If Dave Van Horn retires at Arkansas, would Arkansas's big money, Tyson Foods, Walmart, would they say, "Hey, look, Jay, we'll give you $1 million more"? Normally, I would say that's a lateral move, but if you want to be at a school like Arkansas that's prioritizing baseball and not prioritizing football and some of those other things, it's at least a possibility. Mississippi State's off the table. At what point would Florida tire of Kevin O'Sullivan? I don't know, but I don't think Florida would be the spot for Jay Johnson. I don't know. I don't know the answer other than to say if LSU's administration doesn't step up for Jay Johnson, I think it's going to look bad. And look, I know right now they went out and got Lane Kiffin. They went out and made all these moves to restructure the university and the athletic department, and it all looks great. And they went out and got Will Wade, and certainly I'm happy as a clam about that. I am not anti-women's basketball. I am not anti-Kim Mulkey getting her fair share of the revenue sharing. I think that's important, and I think she's obviously shown the ability to win big. I don't know that I would necessarily prioritize women's basketball over baseball. Is that a choice that LSU needs to make? I don't know. In that same thread on X, this gentleman who allegedly works for Newsweek did say that he thought LSU was going to be competitive in the NIL space in every sport, baseball included. Obviously, Jay Johnson is already the highest paid coach in college baseball. I don't know what else LSU could do for him from a salary perspective. LSU stepped up to retain Josh Jordan last year when he had a chance to be the head coach at Duke. I don't know that LSU can do anything else from a staff perspective for Jay Johnson. What I think Jay Johnson is doing right now is I think he's expressing his frustration about the level of NIL and the level of rev share that he is being given. And I do think he is trying to lay it out there publicly. And I don't want to say he's threatening LSU's administration because I don't feel that way. But I think he's laying it out there publicly. And I think when you lay it out there publicly, that there's obviously going to be things that his representatives are obviously doing privately. So whether that's major league teams are contacting his representation, whether that's other college teams that are contacting his representation, I think we would all be very naive to believe that no one else would want Jay Johnson or would want to pay Jay Johnson a ridiculous amount of money. Just something to keep an eye on, not something to necessarily worry about tonight, but just something to keep in the back of your mind as the season gets into its back half and things wind down and things start to happen behind the scenes. Again, much like the Lane Kiffin stuff, much like the Will Wade stuff, you have to watch this stuff as it develops, and this may or may not be the beginning of something developing with Jay Johnson. We'll be back here tomorrow to preview LSU and Bethune-Cookman. Pretty decent Bethune-Cookman team coming in here tomorrow night. It'll be an interesting game, and we'll be here tomorrow to preview it. Until then, be good to one another, boot up, and always, 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 go Tigers.